As the doors of the luxurious VIP vehicle opened upon arrival at a tropical island where the sun shone like gold, the waves gently kissed the shore, and palm trees danced in the breeze. The couple's excitement was supposed to be replaced by tranquility. However, the storm within them continued to rage, defying on the serenity around them. Their relationship had been rocky for the past few months. Small arguments had escalated. Words left unsoftened had been replaced by silences that tested the limits of patience. That's why this vacation was less of an escape and more of an attempt at repair. They wanted to remember each other again, to laugh together, and perhaps to see if everything could be as it once was. Ethan took off his black sunglasses, leaned his head back, and took a deep breath. Isabel, on the other hand, placed a forced smile on her face as she examined the hotel's grand lobby. Something inside her had broken, but she wanted to believe that they could reconnect during this vacation. When the receptionist, in a polite tone, directed them to their private suite, they followed the hotel staff carrying their luggage. Everything was perfect when they entered the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows framing a breathtaking view, the crimson hues of the sunset reflecting on the ocean, the distant sound of gentle waves. It all seemed exactly as it should be. Yet, the unspoken words between them mingled with the heavy air of the room. On the first day, they enjoyed the sun by taking a walk on the beach and lounging on sunbeds. Ethan, with a cold drink in hand, was engrossed in his book, while Isabel sat a few meters away, casually observing something out of the corner of her eye. Then, a man, whom Ethan assumed to be the hotel manager, approached Isabel and started a conversation. At first, it seemed like casual small talk, but the way she laughed, the way she lightly touched the man's shoulder as she spoke, was enough to gnaw at Ethan from the inside. He lowered his gaze back to his book, but he couldn't read a single line. His chest tightened, his throat felt constricted. Maybe I'm overreacting, he thought. But when Isabel noticed the tension on his face, she didn't even bother to ask what was wrong. His silence that afternoon turned into a heavy unease over dinner that evening. As the days passed, the cracks in their relationship didn't heal. Instead, they became even more apparent. Small arguments turned into sharp exchanges, unspoken emotions deepened, and their glances no longer carried understanding. Eventually, one night in their hotel room, a heated argument erupted. When Ethan brought up her conversation with the manager, Isabel angrily shifted to the other side of the bed. "I can't even talk to you about anything anymore," she shouted. Ethan didn't respond. He clenched his jaw, staring at the ceiling in silence. The silence that filled the room was harsher than any words they could have exchanged. The woman made a decision that night without telling anyone. She silently packed her suitcase and booked the earliest available flight online. In the early hours of the morning, while the man was still asleep, she slowly closed the door, ignoring the few tears rolling down her cheeks. She had to leave. The vacation was over, and maybe the relationship was too. As she headed to the airport, she put her phone on silent and ignored the messages. But the emergency news announcement playing on the taxi's radio changed everything. Due to seismic activity in the region, a massive tsunami warning has been issued. Authorities advise all residents along the coastline to move to higher ground as soon as possible. The airport and all flights have been canceled. A sharp fear pierced the woman's heart. She thought of him. She wondered where he was at that moment. She unlocked her phone and tried to call him, but the signals were down. At the same time, the man was rushing through the hotel, frantically searching for his girlfriend. Even the reception staff had started fleeing to secure themselves. Outside, people were running in terror. Buses were packed to the brim, and the sky had suddenly turned pitch black. At that moment, the airport's announcement system activated. "All passengers must disembark from the planes. Due to severe waves, the airport is closing." The woman had no choice but to get off the plane. Now she was completely unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, as the man tried to make his way to the hotel's rooftop, he could see the massive waves approaching from a distance. The water was rising. Her phone still had no signal. She hadn't heard from him for hours. Lost in the chaos of panicked crowds trying to escape, she felt completely helpless. Just then, a single message appeared on her screen, offering a glimmer of hope. "There is a safe island. You need to get there." The sender was their mutual friend who worked at the meteorology department. She had no choice but to take their warning seriously. She didn't know if Ethan was still at the hotel, but she couldn't wait for him there. Rushing away from the airport, she headed to the harbor, desperate to find a boat. She had to escape. But escaping without Ethan... The harbor was in complete chaos. People were desperately scrambling onto boats, captains were fleeing without taking passengers, and sailors were doing everything they could to survive before the storm hit. Finding a boat was nearly impossible. She looked around in despair, then jumped onto the smallest dinghy she could find and surrendered herself to the mercy of the waves. She had to reach the safe island. Ethan had to come too. He would come, right? Hours later, after an exhausting struggle, she finally reached the island. Her eyes scanned the surroundings in desperation. It was a small, desolate place. Just a few huts, a few trees, but no Ethan, no one at all. There was no sign of him. She sat down and started to wait. As time passed, the fear inside her grew stronger. What if he never came? What if the last time she saw him was back at the hotel? At that moment, when Ethan learned that Isabel had left, his chest tightened. He had to reach her. But when he arrived at the harbor, every boat he could find was either full or had already departed. Desperately struggling in the crowd of people trying to escape, he muttered to himself, "A boat! I need to find a boat!" Finally, he spotted an old, rickety fishing boat that was still empty. No one wanted to board it. Its engine was faulty, but he had no other choice. As he threw himself onto the boat, the sky darkened even more, and the waves began to rise dangerously. The ocean was furious. As the boat moved forward, he kept his eyes locked on the shore and the looming waves. He was out of time. Behind him, an enormous wall of water was rising, preparing to swallow the coastline whole. What if he didn't make it? What if Isabel had already been caught in the tsunami? The waves tossed the boat around like a toy, but he gripped the wheel tightly and pushed forward with all his strength. He kept repeating one thing to himself, "Izzy, hold on! I'm coming!" Isabel sat on the shore, helpless. She had been waiting for hours. The wind whipped through her hair, sending a chill down her spine. Her hope had nearly run out. With every second that passed without seeing Ethan, the fear inside her grew stronger. What if he didn't make it? What if he had been lost in those monstrous waves? She lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. And then she heard a sound. At first, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks on her, but then footsteps. Someone was approaching from behind. She held her breath and slowly turned around, and she saw him. Ethan was there, alive, breathing, looking at her, smiling. His clothes were drenched, his breath uneven, but he was alive. For a moment, they both stood still, eyes locked. Then, without a second thought, Isabel ran to him. Ethan opened his arms and pulled her into a tight embrace. They were safe. They were alive. And at that moment, nothing else mattered. Behind them, the ocean was still raging, but they had survived the greatest storm together.